Glad we're all getting together again for some of the last O Ship episodes of the year. We won't be doing one next week. We'll probably only do half of December, but we're going to end on a bang with some really, really, really great guests. Again, I'm pulling from the list of talented but also friends of mine guests that I've been tapping into this year. If you got great friends, why not use them? And today I'll be introducing you to my friend Dele Atanda. So Dele has got quite a few notable achievements. I met him when he was the head of digital for Diageo back in the mid 2000s when I was working on the Guinness account and doing a lot of cool stuff for Diageo. He was a real big fish that I was very keen to meet, and I remember being very intimidated because he sounded fancy on the phone, as you'll hear when you're about to meet him. And he had a lot of budget control, and I took him to the swankiest restaurant I could find in London, and never dreamt that he and I would be kind of hanging out till 2 a.m. that night, and would end up becoming very, very dear and very, very close friends. From there, he went on to be the chief digital officer of IBM around their aerospace and defense group. And actually now he's back in the entrepreneurial game, which he's danced in and out of throughout his career. All around privacy and data privacy. He's been passionate about it as long as I've known him, but he really went all in over the last couple of years, and you're going to hear a little bit about that. And so I thought it would be fun to talk about a subject that's near and dear to his heart, and that's really talking about how digital, how data, and how privacy is all being impacted by this crazy-ass pandemic that we're in. So with that, we will go into another week of O Ship. Also, I should have mentioned earlier, I don't know if you can tell the video quality is a little different. In the spirit of true O Ship everything, we're trying a totally new technology today that we tested 15 minutes before the show. So good luck. Hopefully someone's actually watching right now, and I'm not just talking to myself, which wouldn't be the first time. Luckily, I've got Dele here to introduce me. Dele, welcome to the show.
Hello, Freddie. I feel like an astronaut testing this new technology in a final.
I get to see you being like, as we're like, hey, we're going to try this new thing. As we're in the kind of green room earlier, and it's like, this reminds me of the 2000s. This is. Was he doing this with my websites 15 years ago? Oh my god. Probably, by the way, as a downside, but it's too late. You're stuck with me now.
Indeed. I enjoy being stuck with you. I remember once you said to me that, you like to see yourself as someone who collects eclectic people. I thought that was a great line.
I definitely collect the people. What they say, it's you don't throw stones in glass houses. So if I like eccentric people, it makes it a little easier for me to be eccentric too.
Absolutely.
So I think where I'd love to start is someone, like I mentioned earlier, have been really, really passionate about privacy your whole career. I remember even talking about it the first night we ever met, and really, having just a deep passion for it there. Over the last, I think it's 2 or 3 years now. 2 years you've had metaMe, which is kind of your latest entrepreneurial venture. First of all, it'd probably be helpful to explain a little bit to our audience what that company is. But I'd love to understand maybe where you're at now, and maybe where you started, and probably what you've learned along the way, because I know a lot's changed for you, and that's something that if you're an entrepreneur out there or you're a business leader right now, I think understanding it's gonna be a rocky road out there. I think a lot of people can kind of identify with these journeys, and will probably enjoy hearing about some of the highs and maybe also some of the lows of that evolution.
Yeah, I mean, God, the world has changed so much since when I started, really, in terms of the overall digital space and the attention to data. I mean, I guess just to put it in context, so I'll start from where we are now. So metaMe essentially is it's a data management platform. The way we actually describe it now is as an operating system, a clean data operating system, which we call Nano S. And it's like a Nano because it's micro operating system that within Android or iOS allows us to share clean data assets. And this is the thing that we pioneered, several years ago, which is around creating information that people can own and using blockchain and crypto technologies to make that real, to make information into tangible assets that people can own. And our spiel has always been about transforming data to currency. Data has actually become more valuable than money. That's one of the things that's going on in the market, but it's very difficult for people to be able to realize that or make it tangible, or for it to be anything more than a catchy sort of soundbite in the short term. And that's a lot of what we've been focused on. But I think one of the big learnings that really is pretty kind of, well, certainly on the data side, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that, it's a very abstract kind of thing. And I think one of the things we've learned with metaMe specifically is that when you talk about a clean data operating system, or even when you talk about data period, it becomes this thing that it's like talking to people about maths or algebra. It just switches people off because of the complexity that's involved with it. So one of the things that we've learned to do more is really focus on the go-to-market applications, the use cases, and to really focus on use cases that are very specific, very targeted, where the value is very clear to people, and that people can.
That's a great insight. I think it's really easy to get lost in your own technology if if you're an innovation company. Frankly, even with basic products, you see people a lot of times in marketing talking about, oh, it's got this new feature, whatever, but no one cares unless you're an engineer or you're an inventor. And I mean that respectfully, but it's like, you have to solve meaningful problems for people, and connect it back. And it's like, give me a reason to believe, give me a reason to care. And I can imagine that's tricky. Can you give me an example of how you guys are trying to play that out?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the first things so we've got two products that we're focused on now. One is in media and one is in health. And I think this is the thing, people want tangible things, especially with like technology, and then particularly with blockchain technologies. Everyone's so deep in the technology, and you forget that it's like, if I think about something like Foursquare, for example, or any app you can name of, right? The fact that the internet and all of these and mobile and iOS and Android are the enabling technologies that make these things happen is secondary to most people. Nobody cares about how the internet works. It's just that you can access these things right away. So I think that's one of the things that we've understood, and to really kind of start to be much more product focused in terms of solutions. So and we can talk a bit more about, one of the first areas we started looking at was mental health, for example. And we ran some workshops with, actually, interestingly enough, IBM was our primary client when we started this.
Handy to have friends at IBM.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting, but yeah. And we looked at employee well-being, and we were trying to make a proposition around how our protocol and technology that enables privacy could be used to bring benefits to employees. Long story short, we ran some design thinking workshops with the HR department around looking at mental health at work and general well-being. And what we realized very quickly is that data was essential to get the results that the company wanted, that the health well-being service providers wanted, and what the employees actually wanted. But that employees were very frightened about sharing information with their employer, more so than sharing it with any other kind of third party, because of the potential impact that would have on them and their families. That was one. But
it's interesting.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting insight. That was the first time I heard people talk about the value proposition of privacy beyond themselves. Like it extended beyond just my privacy and my personal exposure, but now my actions could impact my family.
And do you think that's because, and just riffing here, but I think there's no absolute. So first off, anything I say, there's going to be different kinds of people there, but I'd love to get your general reaction to this. some people I could imagine being very sensitive to privacy around their employer because they're like, well, what if they find out something about me that doesn't make me hireable or somehow makes me lose my job? And then I could imagine other people, maybe I hate saying, I don't want to imply some people have got something to hide, but they worry about a negative job impact. And then I think there's, how many people is it like, I just don't want anyone to know about me because I don't like the idea of anyone knowing anything. And then how many people just don't give a shit, bluntly? Do you have any kind of sense of like how people think about privacy if you follow me?
Yeah, no,
And I know you're not saying, maybe there's not hard numbers, but just feelings that you have from seeing people.
I think, this is a great question. And I think one of the things about privacy that is critical is to understand that it's contextual. It's all about context. I haven't met anyone as liberal, as open-minded as they are, that if you paint the right context for them where they don't have concerns for privacy. So I think what it translates, another classic example is people say teenagers or young people don't care about privacy, but actually it's not true. And all the evidence really demonstrates this. And what it is that they don't care about privacy in certain domains, in certain aspects, and or more, and even more importantly, that they know how to navigate their way around particular areas to get the kind of privacy that they want. So I think it is a really essential point that it is contextual, and that contextuality comes down to personality, our own personal relationship with with the concept of privacy on one hand, and then the context in which we're exploring that. So some people, are very private on dating sites, but very open in terms of what they've read and tweeting who they're following. Other people are very private about health and but very open about relationships. Some people are very private about work, but very open about a recreational, like Formula One or football or something, where they're emotionally engaged in a different kind of way. And I think this is one of the things that we always struggled to do was define data in a way that made sense. And one of the things we learned last year, as we were exploring this, is to think about data not so much as this kind of cold, dry information, but think about it in terms of your emotions, your fears, your hopes, your aspirations, your desires. When you start to think about data in that sense, then you start to understand what privacy really means and why it's so contextual in terms of how it's navigated and used.
And what about one of the things I think you've tried to do, and I think what your business is trying to figure out, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is there's different ways you can control data, right? So part of it is you can say, I'm going to stay the hell off things like social media. I'm not going to share data, and that does some part of it. There's another part of it that people don't even realize they're sharing data all the time, just by their behaviors across their mobile devices, across their browsers. Yes, people, some certain mobile companies are now restricting that, to hide your tracking behavior. People can get browsers to hide them, but most people aren't on that. So the point anyway is there's quite a lot of data out there about it, whether you try to be selective about it or not. And I feel like what I always felt that you were really trying to preach was this concept that, well, maybe you could compartmentalize that data into different lockers. I was going to call them buckets, but let's call them lockers. And then you could basically choose to decide who you unlocked certain types of data to. And each different set of data has a value to people. Right now, they're effectively farming us. When I say they, ad companies, data technology companies, governments, frankly, anyone that can, they're farming, mining our data, whatever you want to call it, without us having any access or say in it. There are big companies that share that data with each other, so they compile it into massive databases, and there is a ton of value in that. And that's where you hear people talking about data being the new oil. So what you're trying to do is, kind of insert yourself into that equation, so in a way that is valuable to people. Is that fair, or is that you, or have you kind of evolved on from some of that thinking?
No, I think our core proposition is basically one to turn data into currency, and that's part of what you're talking about in terms of lockers and isolation,
Mm-hmm.
and enable people to realize value from it.
Mm-hmm.
But and I thought about this a couple of days ago actually, and it's such a complex space. It's always about trying to find the right analogy that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense of it. And I thought of the analogy of data is like water, it's like a fluid, right? Now, the idea, if you could imagine there's a big river, right? And there's a kid who sets up a stand along this river with a table and is like, charge you $1 for a cup of water, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of doesn't really make sense. Why are you going to pay a kid $1 for a cup of water right by the river when you can just put a cup of water in and get the water yourself, right? Or even
Also, might be breaking child labor laws. I'm just saying.
there's that point.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I was going to say a midget, but let's not go down that path because I know who I'm talking to. But anyhow, I think that's the thing, right? If you have a big stream of water like a river and people pile up there and someone puts a flag up and says, you've got to pay me for accessing or for having water here, it's a bit ridiculous. However, if you put that river into a bottle like Evian, then suddenly you've got a quantifiable product that people will bizarrely pay money for, right? And as much as the notion of people paying for water was absurd a decade, well, probably 2 decades ago, now it's normal. It's normal practice. And I think it's a similar thing with information. It is really about packaging it. That's the key thing. It's about being able to package information in a way that its value can be quantified. And that's been a difficult thing for us to do today. I mean, I always say that you look at data and the problem, the only metric we have for data is around size, bits, bytes, kilobytes, etc., etc. But that's the least relevant aspect about data in this age of broadband and 5G, where size is irrelevant. It's really all about the content, the sensitivity, and the utility of it. That's more key.
And so, what makes data more valuable than other data when you start talking about individuals? If you start putting, if someone's considered a high value, maybe because of their income level or spending ability, would that drive up the value of people's data? Do you think potentially, or does it?
It can do. It can do. But I think again, it's all about context, right? And that's the key thing. So when we think about the value of data, and we've developed a framework around this, where essentially it's about who is the data owner, who is the data seeker, what is the context of the request for the data by the data seeker, what is the content of the data that is being shared. Those are the 4 kind of key factors that determine the value. Well, those 4 factors set the framework for a transaction, and then effectively the value comes down to the level of risk or opportunity associated with the data set in the context of that type of transaction. So let me make that tangible. If I think about my exercise data, if I share that with, I won't use Whole Foods anymore, Trader Joe's. If I share that with Trader Joe's to get advice on how to what kind of nutritional diet I'm on, then the risk is relatively low to me in that regards. On the other hand, if I was to share my exercise information with my life insurance provider, then actually the risk is significant because my pricing could change dramatically based on the amount of exercise I'm doing or not doing accordingly. So the same data set can have different value depending on who's using it in what context.
A couple of things. Sorry, I'm queuing up questions in my mind because you keep saying things that I think are interesting. Way earlier, we touched on mental health at one point, and I'd like to kind of talk about if you think there's some kind of intersection in a year like 2020 that is obviously a heck of a year. If you think that there's some intersection maybe between people's mental health and how they perceive privacy. So there's so many different areas you can go with that, but I'd be interested to see your reaction or thoughts around it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, we've been working a lot on the pandemic. We've developed an application that really enables people to scan that's themselves. It's really interesting because we have a technology that enables us to measure people's oxygen saturation levels just from looking into a phone. So there's a lot of, and that's interesting and it's important in this perspective of
Mm,
COVID because
mm,
oxygen saturation is a great insight as to whether someone it has COVID, even if they're asymptomatic, if they're not showing any
oh,
symptoms. And also, even after they've been diagnosed positive, oxygen saturation can give you an insight as to whether someone's condition is improving or deteriorating. So that kind of information is very valuable and very important from helping
mhm,
people stay safe. But once you start to get to that level of information, you open up what I call under the skin surveillance.
mhm,
Now, on one hand, it's very important to be able to share this information with public health authorities so that they can understand whether it's in developing vaccines or treatments or just
mhm,
understanding how to deploy resources in the community
mhm,
to get the right people tested at the right time or the right people access to vaccines at the right time or access to the
mhm,
right treatments at the right time. So on one hand, there's a really important aspect of sharing this information, but I think on the counter side of this that we're seeing, take New York City for example, and even around the country. So obviously, again, the COVID has not been the only story this year, right? There's been massive
mhm.
sort of
Yeah.
social unrest, and we now have a situation whereby you've got contact tracing apps that are designed to help figure out where you have been and who you've been in contact with to help understand what the exposure to the virus is. But you've got situations where these are being used by immigration, law enforcement to monitor who's been protesting, to monitor who's been at protests, and then to figure out if they have immigration issues, for example. So ICE might, for example, start to
Mhm.
cut in on people, so it becomes very dystopian very quickly. So, I think on that basis alone, we start to see that privacy really does lead to mental health challenges for a lot of people, and for a lot of people who feel
But when you
vulnerable.
think about stuff like this and gene therapy and CRISPR, and there's so many technologies that we're really on the brink of right now in humankind and society that we're tapping into, that have immense power to do good, immense power to be transformative, and then equally just, man, they can get weird quick. I mean, you talked about, you said dystopian, and it's hard not to feel like, this can't go wrong. A great example of this for me personally, and I mentioned this once on the show, where I think it was 2006. I was giving a presentation about, sorry, no, it would have been 2012. I was giving a presentation or 2010, excuse me, about the kind of social media and the impact of social media. And I remember talking about how that was going to become, going to form the foundation of the semantic web because we know so much about everyone. And then how, the web would almost be like this giant mental collective memory. This is like for all of us. But now I can't help but feel like it's tearing us all apart in such a terrible way. And all this data is being weaponized against us
Right.
in ways that make me very frustrated and very, very sad. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's a good point.
yeah,
Without
it's
question,
hopefully guys like you will find a way to maybe help us to use data in a way that stays being used productively and for good, and that people feel good about it individually, and that companies use it responsibly, because the reality is companies, yes, there's some great companies out there that follow a moral compass, but most companies follow the compass of profit,
yeah.
and that is not aligned with the best interests of everyday people, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point that you make, because I think that to win this war, that you have to attack it on many fronts. And one of those fronts is the profit front. So, and this is, I have a very strong belief in this. And will increasingly build up the data and the academic rigor around this to prove this. But it is clear to me that, I mean, indisputably, I think there's two things that are really important. First is, I am a technologist. Like you, I am passionate about technology. I'm passionate about what technology can do to transform the world and change our lives. And I do believe that technology ultimately is going to lead us to better societies and better ways. But of course, technology is just a tool, right? So it's the people, it's the intent behind the technology that is critical in this regards. So, you know, we've done a lot of work around data ethics and data standards, ethical data standards from this regard. And that's one track, and that's really about what's right and what's moral and what's ethical, and how do we use data and technology to help society and to help all of us. But I do think that the profit aspect of it is actually very important in that conversation as well, because this concept of clean data that we coined and is really the essence of what our technology sort of promotes, data that you own, that is self-sovereign, etc. What's really important about it is that this type of data is going to be much more valuable than the kind of data that is acquired from, you know, spurious means, nefarious surveillance, etc. You know, I'll give you, there's an example I use to articulate this. And it's like, if you could imagine, right, remember Flickr, like the photo processing?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So imagine if you were trying to set up an algorithm to go through your Flickr account and look at all your photos and just decide who are your friends, who are your colleagues, friends, colleagues, friends, colleagues, to do sorting on that. So as you can imagine how, you know, okay, you might initially say, well, my friends are on Facebook, my colleagues are on LinkedIn, but that's not necessarily true. Some people use Facebook.
Not anymore. I think all those lines are blurred.
Exactly. So what ends up happening, in order for an AI to actually even stand a chance of being able to answer that question, it would have to get so much information from your life about your friends and where you've been. Did you meet a person in the evening, or did you meet them during the day? You know, have you got work meetings scheduled with them? It's got to get so, and even with that, the error rate would be colossal, right? You'd probably be 60-40 is optimistic in terms of being right. Now, think on the other hand, if there was a model that said, okay, Freddie, I need you to spend an hour going through your Flickr account, and for every person that you flag as a friend or colleague, I'll pay you $1. Which data set is going to become the more valuable data set? Obviously, it's the one that you've curated, right? Now, the thing is that if you are then if you're trying to develop any kind of facial recognition technology, for example, or something like that, then you're going to gravitate towards these higher quality data sets. So I think there is and we're a little bit of away from this at the moment, but I do think that as far as the data economy goes, which is clearly driving innovation and driving the economy now, a clean data economy will rise because of the economic value that comes from having better data.
That is very interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch how you play this out over the next couple of years. That's for sure. Yeah, maybe one more. Being conscious of time, I've got kind of one big more question for you. If you were going to give advice to any entrepreneurs coming up through this particular industry, so specific to your world, which I think is, again, it has a whole unique set of challenges. What advice would you give them if someone was trying to get started today?
You know, so there are a couple of things. You know, I've spent the big epiphany that I had this year, I would say, you know, trying to raise capital for many years in this space, which is very difficult. And you're up against the FANGs and Google and Facebook kind of space. But I would say that as an entrepreneur, the big learning that I've come across is that, you know, we grow up with this idea that investors, VCs particularly, invest in ideas and that they invest in innovations. And so we build up this whole proposal of this innovation and this idea that we have, and we try and sell it to investors so that we can go and build it and then turn it into a business. But what I've come to learn is that actually that's completely the wrong way around. What you actually need to do is bootstrap and build the business. Because if you can build a business, it doesn't really matter what the idea is. You don't have to justify the anymore, because the business talks for itself and the numbers talk for themselves. You know, if look at Airbnb. I mean, what a ridiculous proposition if you read it on paper, and I'm sure you've seen the original deck for it, right? It just made no sense. But now it's a load of investors in it because the business is actually working. So I think it's a tough lesson, and it's a hard lesson, but I think that it ultimately makes you a better entrepreneur, and it makes you deliver better products and better.
I totally agree. Yeah, if I even look back at Guide as an example, like I would have multitasked. I would have killed myself for about a year working a full-time job probably, and then trying to figure out a way to do this. I would have bankrolled it. I would have tested it. I would have gone through some of the awkward phases, and then you have a real business on your hands, and otherwise you're a smile on a PowerPoint. And I want to be super clear. A lot of people raised a lot of money on a smile on a PowerPoint, but I can't think of anyone that wasn't better off for maybe trying it, slowing it down a little bit. A lot of money is wasted by it from investors if you haven't validated the idea yet. And unless someone's like not just a once over win, but a twice over, a three, like they're just an absolute Midas touch, well, I necessarily recommend that someone goes out and does that now. Okay, on a couple of closing thoughts. First off, I love having you on. I always enjoy chatting with you. The only thing I don't like about chatting with you when I'm on this, we've got this two-way split, and we're talking to each other. I can't help but two things. He's smarter than me. He's got a better accent than me, and he's better looking than me. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. It's just like I took the glass off. Maybe that's better. And I still can hear your posh accent. I've seen your look for years. I was gonna wear the exact same outfit as you just to make it super weird. But we'll end up with this crummy T-shirt. All jokes aside, I always love listening to you. I always love hearing your thoughts. You always have an interesting point of view on the world. For any of you that are listening or watching right now across Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube or any of the places that we're broadcasting, if there was a subject that we didn't answer or something that you wanted to ask Dele or me, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'll send a note to Dele and we'll come answer it later. For those of you that stuck through the whole time watching it live, lovely. If you're watching it later, lovely. If you enjoy the content, the best thing that you can do to support us is give us a like, share the video, tell your friends. It's not something we do for money. It's just something we enjoy. And the more people that know about it, the happier we are. So thank you so much. And Dele, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun talking. And it's great to see what you're doing with this show. I love it. I love it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
All right.